Hi, welcome back to Bolt's Delights. In this video I want to introduce you to a game called Dungeon Twister, the card game. This is published by French company Ludicali and is a re-implementation of Dungeon Twister, the board game, which is a real classic game. And this card game really does emulate the board game very well. I think a lot of card game translations, well, just don't translate and you end up with a completely different game. This one is an exception. It's the same game, just with card components. It's a small box. Let's have a look inside and see what we get. A rule book and a whole bunch of cards. So it really is just a card game. But they're non-standard, you know. They're these square cards. Okay. It's strictly two-player. That's the only other thing. Whereas Dungeon Twister, the board game, varied the number of players, and it even had a solo variant. This one is strictly two-player only. What I'd like to do in this video is give you a little instruction on and a demo of gameplay. We have 12 room cards, and there's 6 pairs of rooms. Okay, there's 2 red, 2 green, 2 silver, 2 purple. Okay, each of these rooms has 4 zones. There's the rotation gear zone, triangle zone, circle zone and square zone, and that's really important. We've also got other features on here, these walls that separate the 4 zones. This is a pit trap, portcullis, and here an arrow slit. Each player comes with a set of cards. We have an orange player and a blue player. They each get 1 action wheel card, and this is going to be used to record how many actions you have available to you each turn. Okay, so every turn you have a certain number of actions to play. This one runs from 0 to 3 on one side and then 4 up to 7 on the other, so it's double-sided. You can turn it over when you have more than 3 actions available to you. We have 25 character cards, so this is where the real variety of the game comes from, is the sheer number of different characters. You're only going to be playing with a small subset of these each adventure. And then each player also gets 13 object cards. These are things that they're going to be hidden around the dungeon. And then we have combat cards. Each player gets 9. They run from 0 through to 6. And 3 jump cards each. And here is a broken wall card, if you're playing with a character that can break down walls. I've gone ahead here and set up scenario number 4. Let me show you what's gone on here. Scenarios 2, 3 and 4 are considered to be tutorial scenarios, and this is the last of those. But I think this makes quite a nice short game using this setup. This is the number of victory points before the game is concluded, and you earn victory points by having characters escape the dungeon or by killing opponents' characters. This is the number of characters each player has, so here we have a scenario with 6 characters each. The number of objects each player has, so we have 4 objects each. And then, ignoring the numbers for a moment, this is the setup of the dungeon. So this shows us we have 8 rooms in a row, 2 side by side. And the number 2 here shows you that there's 2 characters or objects in each room and a maximum of 2. This is what they call the standard scenario, the 5 victory point one, and this is the first non-tutorial setup. So you see the room's a lot longer, and there's 2 rooms in the middle that have 3 objects or characters, and it's to 5 victory points. And then the advanced one is quite a bit longer, more characters, more objects, and again a bigger setup that's using all the rooms. So here's our dungeon setup. You can see it's a 2x4 dungeon with the blue player playing from this end to have characters escape out the yellow end whose characters are heading this way, and of course if they're going to clash, fight each other in the middle. The blue team, you can see they have 2 characters revealed, so for the start of the game you'll place these characters hidden, and then you'll simultaneously reveal which 2 characters you've chosen. Remember, the scenario told us they started with 6 characters and 4 objects. So there's going to be 4 objects and 4 characters hidden throughout the dungeon, and these are the cards you see scattered around here, during setup, each player has taken turns laying one of their 4 objects, 4 characters, face down in these rooms. The blue player has chosen the crossbowman and Naga to begin in their starting zones. So these 2 spaces here are called their starting zone, and their action is at 0. Whichever face is pointing towards the dungeon is the face that's active. So at the start of the game we have the 0 pointing inwards. They've got 0 action points available to them. So before we get going on this scenario, let me explain with the help of the troll here how these characters and objects work together with the rooms. And we'll do this by grabbing one of the spare rooms. Here's one of the blue rooms. This troll is currently in this zone, in this room. I know it's in this room because its card is adjacent to this room. Which of the 4 zones it's in is indicated by whichever side of the character is pointing towards the room. So if this character were to move from the square, the green square zone, into the gear zone, I would rotate the character so that the gear zone on the character card is pointing towards the room. If he was to then move from here, the gear zone, over to the circle, the blue circle zone, again I'd rotate the character. And the same applies to objects. So we've got this sword here. If we want to put it in this room, we'll have it adjacent. It doesn't matter which side. And because we've got the blue circle, it means the sword is currently in this room, in the blue zone. If I move this card around here, then it's still in the same place. It's adjacent to this room and it's facing, is with the blue circle touching the room, so it's in the blue zone. Again, it's in this room and it's in the blue circle zone. Okay, if the object moved from here to here, I rotate it. And that's what this card game is all about. And this is why we're using cards, instead of tokens in the room or miniatures for the characters. With that in mind, let's get into showing you some gameplay. Doesn't matter who goes first, we'll have the blue player go first. You can determine randomly. Every turn, the first thing you're going to do is take 3 action points. But as kind of a penalty for going first, on their first turn, on the first turn only, the starting player gets just 2 action points. So we'll rotate. Remember, the side facing the dungeon indicates what's active. So the blue player has 2 action points. Most actions cost 1 action point, and one of the first things you're going to want to do is reveal one of these dungeon tiles. So you can have one of your characters who's adjacent to a face down room, reveal that room for 1 action point. So why don't we have the crossbowman here for 1 action, so we'll rotate down to 1, reveal this room, and the way you reveal a room is you turn it this way. Okay? Not this way, but this way. So when you're setting up your dungeon tiles and you're shuffling, because the orientation should be random too, make sure you're not just shuffling the cards but kind of turning them, rotating them. So I find kind of a wash shuffle works really well for shuffling up your dungeon tiles. Now you can see that the crossbowman is facing this room. When they're in the starting zone, they're not yet in the labyrinth, they're not in the dungeon, but the zone that they're facing is this one. Now at the moment, the triangle zone is off here. You can't actually access the triangle zone from the starting zone. The only zone you can access from the starting zone is the blue circle zone. So we're going to have to use some movement points. And for 1 action you can use all your movement points. The number of movement points is given by this number here in the corner. So the crossbowman has 2 movement points. Naga has 3 movement points. And for 1 movement point you can move from one zone to another zone, or you can move from your starting zone into the labyrinth, or you can rotate your character on the starting zone 90 degrees. So with our 2 movement points, we're going to rotate crossbowman like so. That's 1 movement point. Now we've got 1 more movement point left, and we're going to enter the labyrinth with that 1 movement point. Because we're now facing the circle zone, we can, from the starting zone, move into this room. You can see that the only way in is through this little gap where there's no walls. I've had to rotate my table actually to make room for this, but that's one of the things about this game. Although it's a card game, it does take up quite a lot of space. So how are we going to indicate that this guy is moving into this room? Well, we're going to take his card and we're going to place it in this row of cards here. These 2 objects are in this room. These 2 objects are in this room. These 2 are in this room. These 2 are in this room. Likewise, these 2 objects are in this room. These 2 in this room. Okay? So to put our guy in this room, we need to be in this space here. And you'll notice as I've placed him here, I've done it like so. Keeping the blue circle, so that's the zone we're in, facing towards the room we're in. Alright, so all 3 of these cards are in this room. That was blue's second action, so we reduced their available actions down to 0. And that will end blue player's turn. So I've shown you how to reveal a room and move into a room. What I haven't shown you yet, and we'll do that now, is when you reveal a room, you need to also reveal the objects that are in that room. There's 2 objects in that room, which you've now learned, a blue one and a yellow one. As with the blue team, we'll get to place this object first, wherever we want in this room. So we'll turn it over and we'll take a look at it. It's a key. Now because it's an object, and it's of our own colour, our opponents get to place this one. So we're going to leave it for now. Let's reveal the other item. It's a character. The only objects that we don't get to place are objects of our own colour. Everything else we'll get to place first. So the first thing we'll do is place this character, and I think we'll put him as far away from us as we can. Let's place him in the square zone. So we place it with the square facing the room. Now our opponent gets to place the key, and they'll probably want to place it in the same zone, the square zone. That's the yellow player's turn. They'll get their 3 actions, so we'll rotate it so the 3 is facing the labyrinth, the dungeon. And they're going to reveal a room too. Let's choose to reveal this room. Let's reduce their actions down to 2. 1 action to reveal the room. Remember, we turn it this way. And that's not bad. They have their orientation facing this room in the blue zone, and the blue zone is accessible. Now let's see what else is in here. We have a blue character and a yellow character. Remember, it's only objects of your own colour that your opponent places. So I think that the yellow player is going to place their cleric in the gear zone here. So we'll place the gear pointing towards the room. And the warrior, the blue warrior, I think in the triangle zone here. So we'll place the triangle pointing towards the room. For our second action, we're going to move the Mechanog into this room. He's already facing the circle zone, so he doesn't need to rotate, use any movement points rotating. So he's got 2 movement points. We'll use the first one to move into this zone here of the room. And how do we do this? Remember, we take the character card, we turn, it's facing, so that the zone that we're in is facing the room we're in. We've got 2 movement points, we've got 1 movement point left. And the Mechanog is standing in this zone here. Now we can't move through to the gear zone because there's a wall in the way. There's an arrow slit, but we don't fit through arrow slits, so we can't go through here. Likewise, we can't get into the triangle zone because, again, there's an arrow slit. There is a portcullis, so maybe we could do something about that. And can we get through to the square room? Well, we can, but there's a pit trap in the way, and pit traps you need to jump over or use a rope to cross. Now as it goes, every team starts with, as well as their combat cards, which are these, 3 jump cards. So for one action point I could now use one of my jump cards. I've only got 3 for the whole game, so this would be discarded. But I could jump across this pit trap into the green zone. But I'm not going to do that. Instead, what I'm going to do is rotate this room. Remember, the cleric is currently standing in this room in the gear zone. So for one action, you can rotate a room 90 degrees, and it has to be in the direction of the arrow, clockwise or anti-clockwise. So for one action, I'm going to rotate the room like so. Notice that all the character cards are all still facing the same way. They haven't moved zones, they are still standing in the zone they were in. You'll notice if I hadn't rotated the room, then Blue's warrior could have escaped and earned his team 1 victory point on the next turn. Now it's back to the blue team, so they're going to clock up 3 actions. One thing you are going to find really useful in this game is the rulebook, because it has character descriptions, and let's give you a description here of each of the character's special abilities. So the crossbowman here has this special called ranged combat. The crossbowman can initiate ranged combat. He can only fire his crossbow once per turn. The crossbow's combat value is 3. Blue's crossbowman is in this room and in the blue zone right now, so he's a little bit trapped. But he can, because there's an opening here, he can reveal this room, as can Naga in his starting zone. So let's use an action, 3 down to 2, to reveal this room. And it is the twin for the purple gear. Notice that every pair, the gears rotate in different directions. And notice too that the crossbowman can't move through into this room because of this wall. Now let's reveal what's in this room. We have a bow and a cleric. Well, let's put the cleric in the gear room and we'll put the bow in there with him. And with our second action, why don't we have the cleric use the gear? Because the cleric's in the gear room, he can now rotate for one action this room 90 degrees. But these gears, they always work in pairs. So when we use a gear, we can either rotate the gear of the zone we're in, or the other purple gear in this example, can be used to rotate its room. Can't rotate them both though. We don't want to rotate this room, because if we do, we're going to put the square zone right next to our start zone, which will allow the warrior to escape. I do want to rotate this room, so let's do that. And that's going to allow my crossbowman, who's currently standing here, to move through this way. And it also means Naga's got a bit more freedom moving in. So let's use our third action to move Naga. He wants to come in to the triangle zone. He's got 3 move points. So the first movement, 1. Second is going to be moving into that room. 2. In fact, let's assume when we revealed the room, we put the bow in the triangle zone as well. And that means during our movement, if you're in the same zone as an object, you can pick it up. You just place it underneath your card. It doesn't cost any movement points. It could be at the beginning, the middle, or the end of your movement. You can pick up and drop objects. So Naga's picking up this object. He's got 1 movement point left. And with our third movement, we're going to move through to the circle, the blue circle zone. Naga has a special, it's this one here. This allows him to move through arrow slits. So we'll rotate him so that he is now in the blue circle zone. Orange player's turn. Let's give him 3 actions. And Orange fancies moving his warrior, who's currently in this room in the square zone, perhaps around here, and escaping. He's only got 2 movement. He can't move through this zone that has an enemy in it. Let's move into it. So we'll use 1 action to move into here, which means we rotate the character so he's out of this room and in this room. And because we're starting movement and the key's with us, we'll pick up the key. The key's pretty good because it allows you to open a portcullis and place it in this room. In other words, down here with the circle facing the room, because that's the zone we're in. Notice too, though, that the warrior here doesn't really need that key because he's got a special ability that allows him to break a portcullis for one action point, so he doesn't need to use that key. But now we're in the same zone as the blue Naga. So although we've got one movement point left, we can't use it. If you enter a zone with an enemy character, you have to stop. What we can do for one action is initiate combat if you're in the same zone, in the same room as an enemy. So let's initiate close combat. To do this, each player selects a combat card secretly from their hand. To keep it interesting, I think I'll choose a random one. But they've got values running from 0 up to 6. If you choose anything but a 0, then it's a one-time use. You use it, it gets discarded. If you choose a 0, then you can use it as indicated by this infinity sign here. It's not a number 8. An infinity sign here. You can use this, it goes back in your hand. Okay? So to make it interesting, I'm going to choose one randomly for blue. Place it face down. We'll do the same for yellow. And then we simultaneously reveal them. Each player adds the value on his card to the combat value on his character. So for yellow it's 3 plus 0, 3. And for blue it's 2 plus 2, 4. The player with the highest total wins the combat and the opponent's character becomes wounded. So yellow's warrior becomes wounded. So we flip it face down and we need to keep the orientation the same. Right, it's got the same symbols on the back side. So we show that we're in the blue zone still, but down and wounded. Blue discards the number 2. I can't use this again for the game, but the 0 for yellow goes back in his hand. Yellow's got one action point left, but he's going to save it. You don't have to spend every action, every turn. So we go back to blue and they get plus 3, they go back up to 3 actions. Now let's have a look at the crossbowman. He's in the blue zone here of this room. And he also has this icon here which says he can initiate ranged combat. Now, all we need to do, and at the moment the warrior is wounded in the blue zone. We're standing here in the blue zone. Now we could move in here and initiate hand-to-hand combat, but let's just stay here. Let's use one action point to initiate ranged combat from here. All you need to do is make sure that you can draw a line, a straight line from the zone you're in into the zone you're attacking. There's no range limitation at all here. But let's assume the crossbowman was here in the triangle zone. If we're in a zone with an arrow slit, then we can fire through that arrow slit. So we could, if we were in the triangle zone here, we still have range on the blue zone over here. The other limitation is that the lines of sight must be straight and perpendicular to the rooms, even this direction or this direction. No diagonals. Okay? So we couldn't fire through this arrow slit into here because that would be a diagonal line. We could go across here and hit the square zone here. But for now we're good. Let's spend an action to initiate ranged combat onto the wounded warrior here. Interestingly, we can initiate combat against a wounded character. A wounded character, they can't initiate combat, they can't use their specials, they can't take any actions. The only thing they can do is be healed. But he can defend if he is attacked directly. His combat value though counts as 0. Okay, so although it says 3 on the card, his combat value is 0. But we can pick a card for him and it could be any combat card. Let's try and protect him a little bit and grab a high one this time. Perhaps the 6. We want to guarantee his safety. Blue, on the other hand, isn't that bothered. It'd be nice to take him out. He's thinking maybe a 6. Let's use the 3. Now, interestingly, if Blue loses the combat, because it's ranged, not hand to hand, he won't get wounded. Let's turn over the cards then. So the combat value 0 plus 6, 6 for orange. The crossbowman's combat value is 3 plus his card, which is also a 3. That's 6 in total. Now in the case of a draw, nothing happens. No one is wounded. But let's say that he'd chosen to use his 4 combat value card instead. Now the crossbowman has a combat value of 7, which is higher than the warrior's 6. Now both these get discarded. When a wounded character loses a combat, he's eliminated, and the blue player here will take this as a victory point. Okay? He's got 1 out of his required 4 victories. Any objects that were with that player remain in the room, available now to be picked up. Let's have blue take another action. We'll reveal another room. This next one up, because we've got an adjacency. There's 2 blue cards here. Let's see what they are. We have an object and another object, a shield and a bow. But for our final action for blue, I think we will move Naga. He's currently in this room in the blue zone. We've got 3 movement points, but we're only going to use 1. We're just going to slip into this room here, so the square zone of this room, and we'll take the bow with us into here, square zone. Go back to the yellow turn. They've already got 1 action, so we add 3 on. That takes them to 4 actions. And I think for our first action we'll have the cleric, who's here in the gear zone, jump across this pit trap into the square zone. Using a jump card, you've got 3 of them, takes 1 action. Once you use it, it gets discarded. But what it means is you can jump across the pit trap straight into the zone that you're jumping to. So we move the cleric into the square zone, and that reduces our actions back down to 3. We'll use another action to reveal this room and the objects in there. And we've got a blue character and a yellow object, the key. We'll put the wizard here in the square zone, and now our opponent chooses where to put the key, and undoubtedly he'll place it in the square zone with his wizard. And now I think we'll move our cleric from here through into this corridor. We can't go any further because there's a pit trap in the way. So we'll use our another action, and we're moving into the blue zone of this room. And finally, I think we'll jump over this pit trap into the square zone of this room. So I'll burn our last action, grab another jump card, and the cleric moves into this room in the square zone. Blue turn now. He's got this wizard who's looking like he could get out of here, and his wizard has this levitation ability, which means he can kind of fly. He's a flying character over pit traps and over other characters as well. He's got this ability too, which allows him to use magical items. So for 1 action, let's have him move 2 spaces. He can't go this way. Remember, he's in the square zone. This is all kind of blocked in, but he can kind of backtrack around here. So we'll burn an action. We'll have him move 1, fly down here over this pit trap, 2 into the circle zone here. Then we can have him move again, so we'll spend another action. Move across here, over this pit trap into the gear zone. And then as our final action, we can have him fly through this gap and escape the labyrinth. And that counts as 1 more victory point for blue. The blue player is 2-0 up. And that's Dungeon Twister, the card game. The game will continue until one of our players has those 4 victory points. A lot of these characters are going to work well together, so it's particularly when you've got all these different rooms revealed, and because these rooms operate in pairs, you know, that's the magic of the game, is twiddling these rooms around, blocking off your opponent. You can also combine your characters into group combat, picking up these objects, using your character's different abilities. So the cleric here, he can heal wounds. The Mechanorc, he can turn gears in either direction, so even though this one's pointing anti-clockwise, he can turn it for its partner clockwise or anti-clockwise. And that's the variety. Remember, you've got 25 different characters, and this rulebook will give you a description of all of those. There's a lot of fun to be had with Dungeon Twister, the card game. A great little dungeon crawl and 2-player conflict game. That's it for now. I hope you've enjoyed this design from Christoph Bellinger, published by Ludically. See you next time.